Hey, comp covers, welcome back from spring break. So this week I'm gonna finish Iran. We're gonna start some reviews, and we're gonna start practicing some of the short answers that are going to appear on this year's 2020 modified 45-minute comparative government exam. So last we left off, we were talking about Iranian sovereignty. So remember, sovereignty is all about power. And one of the things that we saw was that it has in democratization is that in some ways it has democratized as it moves away from the Shah and the authoritarian rule to a hybrid theocracy kind of democratic um, government. So there's been some degree of democratization, but as we have viewed and observed the formation of the Iranian government since 1979, since it was formed in 1979, we've actually seen the more theocratic portion of the government very much control everything. So you can also argue that it's not very democratic, because the theocracy is becoming the power in Iran. So today we're going to talk about legitimacy. So how legitimate is this government, and what gives it legitimacy? And so I will tell you that legitimacy was very much based in the original Ayatollah in 1979, the Ayatollah Khomeini, and his what is known as like a cult of personality. It's more scholarly referred to as charismatic authority. His charisma, his cult of personality, really legitimized the Iranian government and its new formation in 1979. But it has, over time, and with the death of Ayatollah Khomeini, has become more of a traditional legitimacy. Like it has become um, the over time the processes that it goes through, like elections and um, creation of legislation, are becoming institutionalized with time and formalized as the regime has evolved post Ayatollah Khomeini. So you could argue that it's also traditional legitimacy, um, because elections are considered to be relatively fair. I mean, not by American standards, but certainly by Middle Eastern standards. And it's become a lot more formalized. It's consistent elections, that kind of thing. Power is also lying in its economy, because it's an oil producing country, it is a member of OPEC, and it is an emerging nuclear power. And we're going to be dealing with the nuclear power issue today. Okay, so other sources of legitimacy is Shiism, right? I mean, its whole constitution is based on a theocracy. So Shia Islam is very important to and establishes the legitimacy of the Iranian government. And the caliph, essentially, or acting caliph, is the Ayatollah. His role as a jurist guardianship, and that's where senior clergy collectively have given this guy, the Ayatollah, authority over the entire Shia community. So it's like a caliphate. As a matter of fact, the Ayatollah's official title in the Constitution is, quote, that's a mouthful, the leader of the revolution, founder of the Islamic Republic, guide of the oppressed masses, and commander of the armed forces, and imam of the Muslim world. So that is the Ayatollah, and a source of his legitimacy is very broadly based here. Also, the Constitution. The Constitution of 1979, establishing this mixture of a theocratic democratic government, um, was is a source of legitimacy. It's a constitution, and it was amended in 1989 with the death of the Ayatollah Khomeini. More on the amended constitution in a minute. But the original constitution, 1979, includes affirming faith in God, divine justice, the Quran, Muhammad, the 12 Imams, return of the hidden Imam, the doctrine of jurist guardianship. So realize that there's a lot of legitimacy based in this. Another is a national unity associated with the Iran Iraq War. So I didn't tell you all about this, so I'll tell it to you now. So in 1979, we all know that Iran went through a revolution. overthrew the Shah, now institutionalizes a theocratic government. And as a new government, it's vulnerable. And neighboring countries viewed the now vulnerable Iran and went, maybe this is the time to invade. The first to do this is Iraq. So Iraq was being run by a Ba'athist government. That's a political party, the Ba'athist political party, under a guy named Saddam Hussein. So Saddam Hussein was looking to make Iraq kind of the leader of the Arab world, or leader of the Middle Eastern world. And the Ba'athist government was actually, and so was Saddam Hussein, they were Sunni. But there was a majority of Shia in Iraq as well, a very large majority of Shia. And there was growing concern by the Baathists and the Sunnis and Saddam Hussein that Iran, now a Shia government, could want to spread into Iraq and unite all Shias. So, being threatened, Saddam Hussein, feeling threatened by Iran, launches an invasion. The invasion started in 1980, where Iraq invades Iran. And it goes on and on and on and on for the next 8 years. Finally, the UN gets involved. And I will tell you that things were going pretty well for Iraq, not so great for Iran. But the UN intervened and brokered a ceasefire in 1988. And in so doing, basically, that was it, a ceasefire. Let's just stop fighting. So the war goes on between 1980 and 1988 and essentially unites the Iranian people under its new government in fighting off these foreign attackers. So another sense of legitimacy is how the Ayatollah carried Iran through the Iran-Iraq war. Okay, sources of power. So we are seeing that the source of power used to be dictatorial rule by the Shah, but then it moved to theocratic rule under Islamic Sharia law in 1979. And as a source of legitimacy and as a source of power, the Constitution of 1979 was put before national referendum, and it was voted by the Iranian people to oust the monarchy and establish a theocratic state, giving it power. And it does establish a hybrid theocratic democratic government, but I will tell you what it appears now that the theocratic elements vastly outweigh the democratic elements. It was amended in 1989, and what it did was essentially created a stronger Ayatollah. So again, not very democratic here, more theocratic. It eliminated the need for the leader, the supreme leader, to be chosen by popular vote. So it used to be that that the Ayatollah was actually chosen by popularity, but now it was under the control of the Expediency Council. So it made permanent the Expediency Council, and it also removed the post of Prime Minister. So this used to have a president and a Prime Minister. It no longer does that. It now just has the president. The Constitution does mandate that a small recognized religious minorities have a voice. So Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians actually have a few seats reserved to them in the Majlis. And so this qualification also means that non-recognized religious minorities, remember like the Baha'i, remember them? They were that suppressed group. They are not allowed to have any kind of voice in the Majlis. So they're neither represented in parliament nor enjoy the right to ever become president. But there is some allowances for religious diversity. They have a few seats, 5 seats reserved to them in parliament. Okay, so that actually ends our frame on sovereignty. What I want us to do is, I know that political and economic change isn't necessarily on the exam, but I really think that globalization and fragmentation is so across the board that this could very much be a part of the exam in the context of the nuclear deal. So let's go into the nuclear deal a little bit, and then I'm going to have you guys watch a Fareed video on his take on the nuclear deal. So Iran, as we said, has a sense of power and legitimacy as members of OPEC and also as members of the United Nations. And let's go back and do a history of Iran and nuclear power, right? Because it is it's one of the Middle Eastern countries that are nuclear capable. So that it dates all the way back to the 1950s. Iran has pursued a nuclear energy policy and plan since the 1950s, and as a result, did sign on to this universal treaty known as the NPT, the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. And it's signed on as a non-nuclear weapon state. So it had nuclear capabilities, just not weaponized nuclear capabilities, if that makes any sense. Remember, there's nuclear power, and the way you harness nuclear power is different than how you harness nuclear weapons. The process is different. So it had nuclear capabilities, but again, not nuclear weapons. So the NPT was a piece of landmark international treaty whose objective was to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. As you all know, in the United States, we were having Cold War and, mutually assured destruction and all of that kind of stuff in the 1950s and 60s. And so there was a movement internationally to reduce nuclear weapons, prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. Oops, sorry guys. And then so, open for signature in 1968, the treaty entered into force in 1970, right? So, it began negotiations in 1950. They finally got it put in place, and then everyone signed on by 1968. And then it had effect. It took effect in 1970. On May 11th, 1995, the treaty was extended indefinitely. So, this has been an ongoing treaty. A total of 191 states have joined the treaty, including 5 nuclear weapon states. So remember, Iran joined as a non-nuclear weapon state. So more countries have ratified the NPT than any other arms limitation and disarmament agreement. And so this is a significant treaty. All right. So let's now fast forward to the 2015. So Iran's nuclear program and the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. Now this deal is specific to Iran, right? The other deal was an international deal that Iran signed on to. This one, Iran has maintained that the purpose of its nuclear program was to generate nuclear power, not to use as nuclear weapons. But Mahmoud Ahmadinejad kept saying, well, if we wanted to do nuclear weapons, we have every right to create nuclear grade weapons. The West shouldn't be telling us that we can't do it. So, there was some concern that Iran wanted to move in the direction of nuclear weapons. In August 2002, a leading critic revealed 2 secret nuclear sites, a uranium enrichment facility in Natanz, and a heavy water facility in Iraq. So these are 2 necessary components for the enrichment of uranium to nuclear weapons grade materials for the creation of a nuclear weapon. So as a result of this growing fear that maybe Iran is considering moving towards becoming weaponized, in 2003, the International Atomic Energy Agency reported that Iran, now going into Iran to check them out, was withholding details about sensitive enrichment procedures, indicating that Iran was pursuing weaponization rather than energy. And so U.S. intelligence jumped in and suggested that Iran has abandoned their weapons program in 2003, right after the above report was issued. All right. So there's this ongoing thing. Is Iran nuclear or not? Right? So Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was like, we can be nuclear weapons if we wanted. But then when Rouhani, the more moderate, is elected, he's like, look, we don't want to have nuclear weapons. We just want to develop nuclear power. So Rouhani, the current president of Iran, agreed in 2013 to meet with representatives from the UN Security Council. Um, and that is the five permanent members plus one. That's Germany, because Germany has emerged as a very significant player in the international world. So the P5, meaning the permanent five members plus one Germany, to work out a deal to reduce sanctions in exchange for regular inspections. So Rouhani agreed to go ahead and let's maybe start developing a nuclear deal, just so that because we had been issuing sanctions, the international community had been issuing sanctions against Iran because of the potential weaponization. So it was negotiated in 2015. It rolled out. Iran. It's called. I mean, there's a more formal name, but we refer to it as the Iran nuclear deal. Was struck between Iran, P5 plus one, six world powers: the U.S., the U.K., Russia, France, China, and of course Germany. Was the signature foreign policy achievement of the Barack Obama administration, largely negotiated by John Kerry. So in the 2015 Iraq nuclear deal, which we signed on to along with five other nations, there was an agreement. There are two uranium enrichment facilities in Iran, Natanz and Fordow, where uranium hexafluoride gas is fed into. So this gas is fed into centrifuges, and the centrifuges spin around to separate out the most the most powerful fissile isotope U-235. So it centrifuges, spins around, and it separates out this U-235. This is low enriched uranium, which has a 3 to 4% concentration of this U-235. And it can be used to produce fuel for nuclear power plants, but it can also be enriched to the 90% needed to produce a nuclear weapon. So this is the enrichment facilities at Natanz and Fordow, right? So it's possible that this can go to a nuclear weapon, but more needs to be done to it. In July 2015, Iran had almost 20,000 subterfuges. This is the process of enriching the uranium. And under the official name of the Iran nuclear deal is the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. It will be limited to installing no more than 5,000 of the oldest and least efficient subterfuges at Natanz for the next 10 years. So these subterfuges can be replaced when they get old for the next 10 years. So this isn't necessarily, I don't know if you're seeing this isn't necessarily getting rid of Iran's nuclear program. It's slowing it down. So Iran's uranium stockpile is set to be reduced by 98% to about 300 kilograms or 660 pounds for 15 years. It must also keep its level of enrichment at 3%. So this is, I know this is all like sciencey stuff, but this is basically, let's reduce over time, and let's limit. By January 2016, Iran had drastically reduced the number of centrifuges installed. And it had shipped tons of low-enriched uranium to Russia to get it out of Iran. In addition, research and development will take place only at Natanz and will be limited for 8 years. So no enrichment will be permitted at Fordow for 15 years, and the underground facility will be converted into a nuclear physics and technology center. All right, so again, this is about limitation. This is about reducing and limiting. This was not intended, because Iran wouldn't agree to it, this was not intended to eliminate Iran's nuclear program. So on May 8th, 2018, the United States, President Donald Trump announced the United States will be withdrawing from the deal. So what does that mean? That means the U.S. is withdrawing, but the deal is still on with regard to the other five nations plus Iran. So, but without the U.S.'s support, because we're really alpha male here, without U.S.'s support, the deal could fall apart, and that's the growing concern amongst the international community, and it has happened. Iran is starting to back out of all of these limitations without U.S. support, and so there is a growing nuclear program in Iran as a result. Last but not least, fragmentation. Just not forget that also part of globalization, which is our main idea, is that as Iran has globalized, the Biafra separatist movement um, is a big part of that. All right, so that's it. Watch the video from Fareed, and he's going to talk about Bibi Netanyahu, who is the former um, Prime Minister of Israel. So they're going to refer to as Benjamin Netanyahu, Benjamin Netanyahu, which they refer to as Bibi. So take a look at Fareed's take. See you guys.